The blizzard had already taken 3 of her cattle, and now it wanted her too. But Clara Whitmore would not die in this frozen field, not with 2 babies pressed against her heart. She had buried her husband beneath the cottonwood tree and promised his grave she would survive. She never expected survival would ride in on a half-frozen horse, wearing the face of a stranger named Elijah Cain. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing that December, howling across the Wyoming territory with teeth made of ice and a hunger that never seemed satisfied. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, and the world had become nothing but white, an endless, merciless white that swallowed fences and buried roads, and made a woman question whether God himself had forgotten this corner of creation. "Get in the house," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the screaming wind. She fought the cold with 2 babies clutched tight to her chest, their small bodies wrapped in every blanket she owned, their faces pressed against the worn wool of her coat. Her boots broke through the crust of ice with each step, sinking knee-deep into drifts that hadn't existed an hour before. The barn was 50 feet behind her now, the house just 30 feet ahead. It might as well have been 30 miles. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and she was 23 years old, a widow since September, when consumption had taken her husband Samuel and left her alone on 200 acres of cattle land with twin daughters who had just learned to crawl. She had buried him beneath the old cottonwood tree by the creek, the one he used to sit under and read his letters from back east. She had stood there in her black dress with dust on her cheeks and made a promise to his grave that she would not let this land beat her, that she would raise their girls to know their father's name, that she would survive. Now, fighting through snow that wanted to bury her alive, she was beginning to wonder if she had made a promise she could not keep. The babies, Margaret and Rose, named for their grandmothers, began to cry. Their wails rose up against the wind, small and fragile and terrified, and something in Clara's chest broke apart and reformed into something harder, something fiercer. She would not die in this field. She would not let her daughters freeze before they had even learned to speak. She pushed forward, her legs burning, her lungs taking in air so cold it felt like swallowing knives. The porch appeared through the curtain of white like a miracle. Clara stumbled up the steps, her frozen fingers fumbling with the door latch, and when it finally gave way, she fell into the darkness of her home with a sob of relief that she could not suppress. The fire in the hearth had burned low while she was in the barn checking on the remaining cattle. 3 had already frozen, their bodies stiff monuments to her failure. But there was warmth here still, weak but present, and she laid her daughters in the cradle by the fireplace before turning to coax the flames back to life. That was when she heard it. Above the wind, above the crack and pop of burning wood, above the settling sounds of her old farmhouse, the unmistakable rhythm of hoofbeats in the snow. No one came to the Whitmore place in winter. No one came much at all anymore, not since Samuel had passed, not since the other ranchers had started placing bets on how long the widow woman would last before she gave up and went back to wherever she had come from. Clara reached for the rifle above the mantel, checking that it was loaded, and positioned herself by the window. The rider emerged from the storm like a ghost made solid. He was hunched low over his horse's neck, his hat pulled down against the wind, his coat so covered in snow that he appeared to be made of the same substance as the world around him. His horse was struggling, she could see that much, favoring its left foreleg, moving with the desperate determination of an animal that knew stopping meant dying. He saw the house, changed direction, came toward her. Clara's finger found the trigger of her rifle. She thought about the stories she had heard, about outlaws who used storms as cover, about desperate men who would do desperate things to survive. She thought about her babies sleeping in their cradle, trusting her to keep them safe. She thought about how alone she was, how vulnerable, how no one would hear a gunshot in this wind even if she fired 100 rounds. The rider reached her porch, dismounted, stood there for a long moment, looking at her front door as if he were deciding something. Then he raised his hand and knocked. Clara did not answer immediately. She stood with her rifle ready, her heart pounding against her ribs, watching through the frosted glass as the snow accumulated on his shoulders, his hat, his frozen form. A minute passed, then another. He knocked again, weaker this time. "Please." His voice came through the door, barely audible. "My horse. I've been riding for 2 days. Please." She should not open that door. Every lesson her mother had taught her, every warning her husband had given her, every instinct she possessed told her to leave that door closed and let the storm take whoever stood on the other side. But Clara Whitmore had also been raised to believe that turning away a traveler in need was a sin that could stain a soul forever. And when she looked at her daughters sleeping peacefully by the fire, she thought about what kind of mother she wanted to be, the kind who taught fear or the kind who taught mercy. She opened the door. The man who stood before her was tall, with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale blue, almost gray, and they held a weariness that seemed to go deeper than physical exhaustion. Snow clung to his dark hair, to the stubble on his jaw, to the creases of his worn leather coat. He looked at her. He looked at the rifle still pointed at his chest. He did not move. "I'm not here to cause trouble, ma'am," he said. His voice was rough like gravel over sand. "I just need shelter for the night. For my horse, too, if you can spare the space. I can pay." "Who are you?" "Name's Elijah Cain. I'm headed north. Got caught in the storm about 20 miles back and haven't been able to find my way since..." "We're north, Montana. Got a brother there. He's dying, they say. Wanted to see him before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Clara studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception, for danger, for any sign that this man meant her harm. She found only exhaustion and grief, and the kind of quiet desperation that she had seen in her own mirror more times than she could count. "Barns around back," she said finally. "You see, and stable your horse there. Give him some of the oats if there's any left. Then you can come inside and warm yourself by the fire." Relief flooded his features, not dramatically, not with great display, but in the subtle softening of the lines around his eyes, the slight release of tension in his shoulders. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't forget this kindness." He disappeared around the side of the house, and Clara closed the door against the cold, leaning against it for a moment with her eyes closed. What had she done? What madness had possessed her to invite a stranger into her home, into the same space where her children slept? But it was too late for second-guessing now. The decision had been made. When Elijah Cain returned, he stamped the snow from his boots on her porch before entering, and he removed his hat the moment he crossed the threshold, small gestures of respect that did not go unnoticed. Clara directed him to a chair by the fire, set a pot of coffee to brew, and watched from the corner of her eye as he held his hands toward the flames. "You're alone here," he said. It was not quite a question. "My husband passed in September. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you?" He turned to look at her then, those pale eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch.
"Yes, ma'am, I am. I know what it is to lose someone you love. Wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, let alone a woman trying to raise 2 babies in the middle of nowhere."
Clara said nothing. She poured him coffee in a tin cup and set it beside him, then took her own seat across the room, the rifle laid across her lap. If he noticed the weapon, he gave no sign of it. "How long have you been running this place alone?" he asked. 3 months. Almost 4 now. You've done well. The barn's sturdy. Animals are fed. I've seen operations with twice the hands in worse condition. Flat. Erie won't earn you a second night under this roof, Mr. Cain. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I wasn't offering flattery, Mrs. Whitmore. Just an observation." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them, the storm raging beyond the walls. One of the babies stirred in her sleep, making a small sound that was almost a word. and Elijah's gaze drifted to the cradle. Twins, Margaret and Rose, beautiful names. They were my husband's choosing. More silence. Clara found herself studying the stranger despite herself. The way he held his cup, the scars on his knuckles, the careful way he moved as if he were accustomed to navigating spaces that did not belong to him. There was something about him that suggested violence, but also something that suggested discipline. He was a man who had seen hard things and done harder things, but he was not a man without conscience. "Your brother," she said finally, "in Montana. What's wrong with him?" "Lung sickness. Same thing that took my mother 20 years ago. Doc says he won't last the winter." "I'm sorry." "So am I." He stared into the fire. "Thomas is 10 years older than me, raised me after our folks passed, taught me everything I know about horses, about land, about being a man worth being. I haven't seen him in 6 years, not since I went south looking for work. Meant to go back sooner, always meant to. But time has a way of slipping past a man when he's not paying attention." Clara understood that sentiment more than she could say. She had meant to write more letters to her sister in Ohio. She had meant to visit her parents before they grew too old to recognize her. She had meant to tell Samuel she loved him more often, to hold him longer, to appreciate the ordinary moments that she now understood were the only moments that mattered. "You'll make it in time," she said. "The storm will break. They always do. You sound certain." "I have to be. Certainty is all I have some days." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment that Clara could not name. It was not love, not yet. Though perhaps it was the seed of something that might grow into love if given time and sun and the right conditions. It was recognition. It was the understanding that passes between two souls who have walked similar roads and carry similar scars. The storm raged for 2 more days. During that time, Elijah Cain repaired the broken hinge on Clara's barn door. He chopped enough firewood to last a month. He helped her clear the bodies of the frozen cattle and spoke quietly about livestock management techniques he had learned on ranches down in Texas. He held baby Rose when she would not stop crying and walked with her around the room until she settled, humming a tune that Clara did not recognize but that her daughter seemed to find soothing. He was not presumptuous. He did not overstep. He slept in the barn despite her eventual offer of the spare room, insisting that it would not be proper, that her reputation mattered even out here where there was no one to gossip. But he came inside for meals, and they talked about their lives, their losses, their hopes for futures that felt increasingly uncertain. On the 3rd morning, the storm broke. The sun appeared above the mountains like a promise, turning the snow-covered world into a landscape of blinding diamonds. Elijah's horse had recovered from its lameness, and he saddled it slowly, methodically, as Clara stood on her porch with one twin in each arm. "You could stay," she said, surprising herself with the words. "For a while longer, I mean. Until you're sure the roads are clear." He tightened the cinch on his saddle, not looking at her. "I have to reach Thomas." "I know. Boo. I'll come back." He turned then, and his pale eyes found hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "If you'll have me, after Montana, after I've done what I need to do, I'll come back. If you'll have me." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, tears she had not allowed herself to shed in months, not since she had buried her husband and decided that crying was a luxury she could not afford. "You don't know me, Mr. Cain. You don't know anything about me. I know you opened your door to a stranger in a storm when most people would have let him freeze. I know you're raising 2 children alone on land that wants to break you, and you're not breaking. I know that when you look at the world, you see possibility instead of defeat." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue-gray eyes. "I'd like to know more, if you'll let me." She should have said no. She should have reminded him that he was a stranger, that she was a widow in mourning, that the world would not look kindly on such arrangements. But Clara Whitmore had spent too long being practical, being careful, being afraid. She had opened her door in a blizzard. and let in something unexpected, and perhaps it was time to stop fighting the cold alone. "Come back," she said, "when you've said your goodbyes. Come back to me, Elijah Cain." He smiled, a real smile this time, one that transformed his weathered face into something almost beautiful. He touched her cheek with fingers still cold from the morning air, and then he mounted his horse and rode north, becoming smaller and smaller against the endless white until he disappeared over the ridge. Clara stood on her porch for a long time after he was gone, holding her daughters against the chill, watching the spot where she had last seen him. The winter was not over. There would be more storms, more struggles, more nights when she wondered if she would survive until spring. But for the first time since September, she felt something other than determination holding her upright. She felt hope. And when March came, when the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared in the fields she had thought were dead, a rider appeared on the horizon. He came from the north, following the same path he had taken when he left, and he carried with him a letter from a brother who had passed peacefully in his sleep, grateful for those final weeks together. Elijah Cain dismounted at her gate. He stood there in the early spring sun, hat in hand, looking at her with those winter sky eyes. "I came back," he said. Clara smiled. She walked down from her porch, crossed the muddy yard, and stood before the man who had arrived in a storm and promised to return. "Welcome home," she said, and for the first time in a very long time, the word meant exactly what it should.